Fellow workers, welcome to Labor Day 2018. Please join us for our national anthem.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed as the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. Oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streamed, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Play ball.
That was awesome. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome everybody to Labor Day here in the historic Woodstock Square. I'm Kathryn Potter.
And I'm Robert Rosenberg. Fellow workers, today we are joined by labor leaders, candidates, local activists, and historians. Today, in this historic location, we will celebrate and reflect upon the triumphs and tribulations of the American worker and the American labor movement.
All right, but fellow workers, let's talk about labor right now. All right, let's see a show of hands. Raise your hands, okay? Don't feel shy or ashamed. We're all in this together. Fellow workers, how many of you are overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated?
You too.
How many of you are working more than an 8-hour day? How many of you are expected to answer phone calls and emails when you're at home or on vacation?
Or how many of you can't even take a vacation? All right. Fellow workers, how many of you have returned to work after giving birth to a child or sent a sick child off to school because you can't afford to take a day off work?
How many of you have had your 401ks wiped out, your pensions attacked, and your Social Security plundered?
All right, look around, look at us.
We have been carrying the 1% on our backs for centuries, and this is our reward.
The 1%. They say that they're the job creators.
They say that the economy is strong because unemployment is low.
But most of all, they say that regardless of wages, hours, and working conditions, we should just be happy that we have a job.
You know what we say? We say that if only one of you had raised your hand today, our fight is not over.
We say, thank you. Our fight is not over. And what we say is, we are the wealth creators. Yes. We are the makers and the doers. Yes.
We are the strength of the nation.
Woo! We outnumber them.
And we've got the power.
We've got the power.
We've got the power.
We've got the power.
We've got the power. We've got the power. We've got the power.
We've got the power. Okay. We do.
That's right. And when we are no longer content to just have a job, when we come together and when we organize, we've got the power.
All right. So our fight is not over. This is Labor Day 2018. Welcome, and thank you all for coming.
Okay, we're going to kick things off with our first speaker. His name is Jim May. He's an Emmy Award-winning storyteller and author. For the last 32 years, he has made his living telling stories, both original and traditional, to school children, adults, university students, corporate boards, and anyone who will stand long enough to listen. He is also the producer of Storytelling on the Woodstock Square, a monthly program which features storytellers and spoken word artists to stage left and to Woodstock Opera House main stage. His books are available on Amazon and at Between the Lines bookstore here on the Woodstock Square. Let's give a big warm welcome to Jim May.
Thank you. Thank you, it's great to be here. Well, you may be wondering why the Democratic Committee, McHenry County Democrats and Progressives have invited a storyteller to start the program. I think it's because the emperor has no clothes. Yeah. Woo! And I'll elucidate on that in a minute. But also, my family were all working people. My dad was a tenant farmer his whole life. And he always said that he was a Democrat because he thought the Democrats took care of the little guy. And I don't see any reason, in my experience over 70 years or so, to change his opinion about that. But here was his favorite story, and I actually retired this story years ago in the interest of bipartisanship and making a living telling stories in McHenry County. But, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures, so here it is. And my dad actually told this story. See, my uncles on my mother's side were Republicans. My grandpa had the general store in Spring Grove. My Uncle Paul had the Chevy dealership. My Uncle Charlie was a precinct committeeman for the Republicans. He got a job at the weigh station there in Genoa City. He'd bring home a lot of butter and things he'd take off the trucks when they'd let him go by illegally. And it was all working pretty well. My dad's family were all Democrats, though. Farmers. And my dad used to tell this story at the store, to get my uncle's goat, he said. About the time the Republican congressman came to Spring Grove to give a big 4th of July presentation, and boy, they gave him a welcome. The flags were snapping in the wind. It was a sunny day. There was buntings, red, white, and blue buntings everywhere. And there was a big crowd, and he got pretty full of himself up there in the stage. The Republican congressman did, and he said, now how many of you out there are Republicans? And they all stood up and cheered and raised their beer steins because they were Republicans, and also he had paid for the beer. Then he said, are there any Democrats out there? And it got real quiet. It used to be that way in McHenry County, not anymore. Woo! But it got real quiet out there. Finally, an old farmer under a tree kind of in the back row said, sir, I'm a Democrat. Well, said the Republican congressman, why in the world would you be a Democrat? The old farmer kind of scratched his head and said, well, my daddy was a Democrat, and my granddaddy, he was a Democrat, and I reckon that makes me a Democrat. Well, said the Republican congressman, that's no reason to be a Democrat, just because your father was a Democrat. Then they say that congressman paused and let a silence descend on that assembled group. For he wanted all eyes upon himself. For he was about to use his superior Republican intellect to spring a cold, cruel lesson of logic on this poor, ignorant, hapless Democratic farmer. He said, sir, that's no reason to be a Democrat just because your father was a Democrat. What if your father was a horse thief? And the farmer said, why, then I'd be a Republican. I've been telling that story off and on for 30 years. It's never been so apt to describe our occupants of the White House. But more than that, stories have, since the beginning of time, represented the voices of the common people. You open up Grimm's fairy tales or 1001 Arabian Nights or any book of folk tales from every culture in the world, and you will find stories about woodcutters and milkmaids and carpenters and mill workers and potters and tinsmiths and people that actually did the work. And a lot of them did not have a voice except for these stories. A lot of them were illiterate. In fact, when the printing press was invented and the king saw the folk tales the people were telling amongst themselves, they outlawed a lot of those folk tales because they spoke truth to power. And if you don't know the story or haven't thought of it for a while, The Emperor Has No Clothes is about a vain, ignorant king. Can you imagine such a thing? And he was so out of touch with his own feelings, and he was so insecure that he allowed a couple of con men who were even bigger cons than him, a couple of tailors, to convince him that the invisible cloth that they were selling him was worth a lot of money. And after he was dressed in this invisible cloth, only the wisest in the kingdom could see its beauty. And the king bought it. And he paraded around his kingdom naked. He was too insecure to admit that he thought he was naked himself. And his people, of course, they bowed down, and they did not want to offend the king. And this went on for some time. Can you imagine such flagrant lying in public? Until finally a little kid was walking along, and the king passed by in a cortege, and the little kid said, "Hey, the emperor's got a bare butt." And the whole kingdom came down because one person told the truth. And that's the power of words, and now we still say the emperor has no clothes, and it certainly describes what's going on now. Now, we used to have the words. We used to be able to talk to the common folk. LBJ, a friend of mine who's a storyteller down in the hill country of Texas, not far from the Johnson Ranch and not far from Johnson City, named after Lyndon Johnson's family. Donna Ingham is her name. She was close friends with Elizabeth Carpenter, who was a speechwriter for LBJ. In fact, Elizabeth Carpenter was the only woman on the airplane on November 22nd, 1963, the airplane that carried JFK's body and his family back to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington. And she said everybody was in shock, people were crying, but she knew that she was the only speechwriter on the plane. When LBJ got there at Andrews Air Force Base, he would be facing 50 microphones, and she knew he needed a speech. So she said, I don't want to be banging on a typewriter in that atmosphere with the grief and the shock. So she hand block printed 45 words, and that's the speech that LBJ gave. And you can see it on YouTube. It's a very powerful and moving speech. But she also tells a funny story about how LBJ could talk to the common man, to the common people, men and women, to workers. She says she wrote a speech for LBJ one time, and in that speech, she quoted Aristotle. Now, am I the only one that's been accused of being an elitist because I'm a Democrat? That's kind of going around out there. And we have to respond to that because the plan now for decades has been conquer and divide. Let's face it, the GOP has divided the working class. They have divided us from our brothers and sisters. And arguing with our brothers and sisters and trying to beat them in a debate or taking out your wrath against the man in the White House against our brothers and sisters and the working people, that's not going to win us in November. We have to learn how to speak to each other. And Lyndon Johnson knew that. So Elizabeth Carpenter wrote a speech for him, and she quoted Aristotle. So old Lyndon, he's got his granny glasses on, he's reading, that's what they do, they'd read the speech, make a few corrections, and give it as their own. So he's reading along. Aristotle looked at her. Aristotle? What the hell? Took his pen, scratched it out, and he read, "My daddy used to say." He knew how to talk to people. Democrats used to have the words. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country, JFK. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. We've got a government right now that's running on fear. It's gasoline, throwing it on the fire. Obama, yes we can. Sí, podemos, yes we can. We used to have those words, but the words have gotten stolen. I'll give you a couple examples. The inheritance tax, the estate tax, is now called by the Republicans the death tax, as if we are punishing those poor millionaires for dying. There was nothing that so united the founding fathers, Jefferson, Washington, Adams, even Adam Smith, the philosophical founder of capitalism and his Wealth of Nations. They decry the idea of inherited wealth, that wealth should be passed down from one generation to another. They felt it was anti-democratic and it could be the ruin of the republic. And now the inherited wealth exemption was just raised by the new tax cut from $5 million for a single person to $10 million for a single person, from $10 million for a married couple to $20 million. It was a giveaway to 4,000 families, only 4,000 families. That money could be going to fully fund preschool, to fully fund health care for all, to build bridges and roads. That money is going to 4,000 families. I don't need to tell you who those 4,000 families give their money to at election time. The death tax. We have to take those words back. It's an inheritance tax. It's to keep us from having an aristocracy. That was what Jefferson and the founding fathers, that was their wish. They had lived under an aristocracy. They knew what it was like. They call Social Security and Medicare entitlements, as if we think we're entitled to it whether we deserved it or not. That's health insurance. It's insurance. We pay for that every day in our paychecks. Or if you're an entrepreneur like me, when you sit down with your tax man every year, you see the chunk of that gets taken out. We have paid for that. We've put it in a fund. It's there. And now Republicans have renamed it entitlement, and we let them. We let them do it. Barack Obama is the only president since Reagan that won the majority of the popular vote twice. The only president since Reagan that won the majority of the popular vote twice because of third party and lots of other circumstances. And Bush's court given the election to W. Barack Obama was the only one, and we stood by and let Mitch McConnell call him a lame duck president when he had a year left on his term. We should all be ashamed of ourselves. And if Kavanaugh gets in, well, if Kavanaugh gets any farther, we need a national strike. If the President of the United States, who this week was publicly announced as an unindicted co-conspirator, if that President of the United States in the White House can appoint the judge who will sit in judgment on his crimes, then we no longer have a republic or a democracy. It's very possible we need to take to the streets. We need a national strike to save the Supreme Court, to save our country. We should be glad we get to save our country. We get to be patriots. We get to march through the vineyards where the grapes of wrath are stored. We get to bring out the vote. This is an important time, the most important election maybe in our history, midterm election. Okay, what else? Right to work has become right to work for a low wage. As if collective bargaining wasn't a very competitive free enterprise type of concept. I just turned my notes upside down. Why did I do that? I want to end with a story. A story that I think maybe answers the why. A couple other words we got to take back, though. I just talked to someone in canvassing last week, and I said, I've been working in schools now, this is my 48th year with young children. We need to fund preschool. Yep. We need to put money into free school. She said, well, why should everything be free? No, get that word free out of our vocabulary. Fully funded preschool, fully funded public universities, fully funded health care for all. It's not free, it's an investment in human capital. Every corporation, every successful major corporation knows that you have to invest in human capital. So, get that word free out of your vocabulary. It's health care for all. Ocasio-Cortez said it most. She said, in the wealthiest country in the world, no person should be too poor to live. Those are the kind of words we need to have. And in fact, I'll be up here with a clipboard, or I'll leave it here if I have to go to the bathroom. And if you got some words for it, if you got a slogan, if you got some words, write it down. We'll pass it up the chain to the committees and to the candidates. I think I have 2 minutes left, so here's the last story that I think answers the question why. It's an old folk tale, of course. The king's wife, the queen, was barren. She couldn't have children. The king put out the word to all the kingdom, all the wise men, all the healers, all the doctors, to come and help, and they would be rewarded with great riches. Well, no one could help the queen. Finally, the king heard from the workers, of course, that there was an old woman back in the forest, an old hen wife. She made her living selling eggs, and she was very wise, and she knew many things. Now, these women were sometimes called witches, and they were executed. But they were often the keepers of the old wisdom, the old remedies, the old herbal remedies for the people. So she came and said, "Sire, the people are sick. The wastewater flows into the same streams and springs where the people get their drinking water. Dig your canals and separate the wastewater, and the people will be healthy. Then you will have a child." And he did just that, and the people were healthy, but there was no child for the queen. And he brought her back, and he was angry. She said, "Well, sire, if you just divide up the land, now you own all the land as royal property, and anyone who poaches, who hunts or fish on it is executed. Divide up your land so each family has a plot of land that they can farm and they can provide for themselves and their own food, and they can form a market and have commerce." And he did those things. And still, there was no children. And by now, he had a gallows built. She was going to be hanged. But she said, "Sire, I deserve to die. I realize that. But sire, just one more thing. Your people are healthy and they have their land, but all the young men are off fighting wars. Make peace with your neighbors, sire, so that the young men can be home and marry and have families and bring joy to their loved ones." And the king did that, and still there was no child. The swordsman was there with the hood and the sword. The old woman lay with her neck on the stump, and the axe was about to fall. She said, "Sire, you can do with me what you will, but will you just look out the window one more time with me now?" So he agreed for some reason, because it's a folk tale. And the two of them walked to the window, they drew away the drapes, and there was his kingdom. And the fields were full, and the farmers were working, and the cows were giving milk, and the calves were romping, and the lambs were bounding in the pastures, and the children were playing. And she said, "Sire, these are your children." And for the first time in his life, he realized the wisdom of that. He made her his highest counselor, advisor. That's the kind of leadership we need. We do it for the future generations. We do it for ourselves, but most importantly, we do it for the children. Happy Labor Day. Thank you.
All right, we got a little song for you, written by Pete Seeger. Sing along, you probably know it.
We want you to sing with us today. That's why we're all singing. We want you to sing too.
Sister
It's a hammer of justice. It's a bell of freedom. It's a song about love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. It's a hammer of justice. It's a bell of freedom. It's a song about love between my brothers and my sisters all over this land. Thank you.
All right, hi. Up next, we've got Kathleen Spaltro from Woodstock Celebrates. Kathleen is a writer, editor, teacher, as well as founding board member of Woodstock Celebrates, Inc. She's hard of hearing, so all that I ask is that you clap really loud and cheer really loud for her. So let's give it up for Kathleen Spaltro, everyone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I'm hard of hearing. I can't be quite sure. You okay?
Yes.
The Debs marker on the side of Old McHenry County Jail points out that the establishment of a National Labor Day was directly tied to the Pullman strike. Illinois Governor John Peter Altgeld supported Debs and opposed sending in federal troops to break the strike. Governor Altgeld had previously pardoned the Haymarket martyrs, who were charged and convicted after a peaceful labor meeting that was breaking up was disrupted by a police raid and then by a bomb. I'm going to read to you excerpts from speeches that Governor Altgeld made to labor audiences in 1893 and 1895. I think you'll be surprised at how pertinent everything he says or said is today. He had four themes: the dignity of labor, the interdependence of labor and capital, the necessity that labor organize and unite, and the importance of united labor to the maintenance of a republic and to democracy. The dignity of labor. The law has set apart this day in recognition of the nobility of labor. And as the governor of this great state, I have come to pay homage to that force which lays the foundation of empires, which builds cities, builds railroads, develops agriculture, supports schools, founds industries, creates commerce, and moves the world. The world has been slow to accord labor its due. For thousands of years, pillage, plunder, and organized robbery called warfare were honorable pursuits, and the man who toiled in order that all may live was despised. In the flight of time, it was but yesterday that the labor of the earth was driven with the lash, and either sold in the block like cattle or tied by an invisible chain to the soil, and was forbidden to even wander outside this parish. In the yesterday of time, even the employers of labor were despised. The men who conducted great industries, who made the earth habitable, who carried on commerce, who practiced useful arts, were looked down upon by a class that considered it honorable to rob the toiler of his bread, a class which, while possessing the pride of the eagle, had only the character of the vulture. The interdependence of labor and capital. While the interests of the employer and the employee may be antagonistic on the subject of wages, they are the same in every other respect. Neither can do anything without the other. Certain it is that the employee cannot prosper unless the employer does. On the other hand, if the purchasing power of the employee is destroyed, the employer must soon be without a market for his goods. The great American market was due to the purchasing power of the laboring classes, If this should in the end be destroyed, it will change entirely the character of our institutions. The necessity that labor organize and unite. What I wish to point out is the absolute necessity of each class or interest being able to take care of itself in the fierce struggle for existence. In the industrial world, as well as in the political world, only those forces survive which can maintain themselves, and which are so concentrated that their influence is immediately and directly felt. A scattered force, no matter how great, is of no account in the sharp contest of the age. Fault-finding and idle complaint are useless. Great forces, like great rivers, cannot be stopped. You must be able to fight your own battles. For the laborer to stand single-handed before giant combinations of power means annihilation. The world gives only when it is obliged to, and respects only those who compel its respect. Government was created by power and has always been controlled by power. Do not imagine that it is sufficient if you have justice and equity on your side, for the earth is covered with the graves of justice and equity that fail to receive recognition, because there was no influence or force to compel it, and it will be so into the millennium. Whenever you demonstrate that you are an active, concentrated power moving along lawful lines, then you will be felt in government. Until then, you will not. At present, you are, to a great extent, yet a scattered force, sufficiently powerful, if collected, to make yourselves heard and felt, to secure not only a fair hearing, but a fair decision of all questions. Unite this power, and you will be independent. Leave it scattered, and you will fail. Organization is the result of education as well as an educator. Let all the men of America who toil with their hands once stand together, and no more complaints will be heard about unfair treatment. The progress of labor in the future must be along the line of patriotic association, not simply in localities, but everywhere. And let me caution you that every act of violence is a hindrance to your progress. The last theme, the importance of united labor to democracy and Republican government. It is a universal law in nature, in religion, in politics, and society that the stronger force will destroy the weaker. And only those individuals, those agencies, and those combinations will survive that are able to maintain themselves. The government of the world is not a philanthropic affair. It is based on force, though rarely brute force as was once the case. It has become more refined in its method, but nevertheless, the underlying principle is force, legal force. And this legal force is often shaped and directed by social, financial, and political force. Enormous wealth, when controlled by a few individuals, is sometimes a very powerful factor in shaping the policy of government, because it can frequently control the press and the agencies which form public opinion. It can control fashionable society and the sentiments of many men who, although occupying high positions, are often influenced through that agency. Frequently, wealth, by looking after the matter of selecting candidates, can control not only the construction of the laws, but the making and the execution of the laws. If our institutions are to undergo great change, it is vital that the men of America and not the money should direct the change. Money may be a blessing as a servant, but it is a curse as a master. Money never established Republican institutions in the world. It has no natural affinity with them and does not understand them. Money has neither soul nor sentiment. It does not know the meaning of liberty, and it sneers at the rights of man. It never bled on the battlefield in time of war, and it never voluntarily sought the public treasury in time of peace. To safely guide a country through important change requires the same characteristics which were possessed by the men who founded it. There must be lofty sentiment, honesty of purpose, love of country, love of fellow man, and above all, love of justice. Money possesses none of these virtues. If concentrated capital shall meet with no checking influence or force, then Republican institutions must come to an end. And we will have but two classes in this country: an exceedingly wealthy class on one hand and a spiritless, crushed, poverty-stricken neighboring class on the other. The hope of the country depends upon having a number of forces which will counterbalance and check each other. You are more interested in making the stripes and stars stand for free institutions than any other people in this country. Wealth has always courted aristocracy and bowed to monarchy. It is manhood alone that is interested in liberty and in maintaining those conditions under which the greatest possible opportunities are open to every citizen of the Commonwealth. You cannot leave your children millions to squander. It is therefore important for you to endeavor to leave them a country in which intelligent and honest effort will be properly rewarded, and in which the laborer will not only be worthy of his hire, but will have open to him and to his posterity all of the fields of honor and the paths of glory. That man was once governor of the state. Now, on November 3rd and 4th, Woodstock Celebrates is having a Deb's Home Festival in Woodstock. You are very welcome to attend. It is free. It is meant as a fundraiser for Old McHenry County Jail for its renovation. Any donations will be turned over to the city of Woodstock for the renovation of the building, where Eugene V. Debs spent 6 months in 1895 after the Supreme Court ruled unanimously against his appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker is a regular at this event. He's emceed, I believe, the last 3 years. His name is Patrick Murfin. Patrick Murfin has been a social justice activist for more than 50 years, from the Vietnam anti-war movement and marching for civil rights and justice with both Martin Luther King County. He has been an activist with the McHenry County Peace Group, the Old Interfaith Council of Social Justice, and the Tree of Life Unitarian Universalist Congregation. He is the co-founder and longtime host of Diversity Day Festival on the Square. He was a longtime Democratic Precinct Committeeman and party leader, and 3-time candidate for office. More recently, he has lent his efforts to the fight for marriage equality, immigration justice, and in support of the resistance. He blogs regularly on Heretic Rebel, A Thing to Flout. Check it out. Here's Patrick Murfin.
Good afternoon. I'm really glad to see you folks once again. We are here because Woodstock has this natural and historic connection to the creation of Labor Day. And you've heard a little bit about it, and about Eugene V. Debs, and about the jail, and about the Pullman strike. And these are critical moments in American labor history, and more importantly, in American history altogether. But they are part of a greater and longer arc. I'm going to tell you some incidents in that arc, and I'm going to connect it to where we are today. I could go back generations and eons to peasant revolts, but let's start in 1877, when a flare-up in West Virginia turned into a almost completely unorganized nationwide strike called the Great Railway Strike of 1877 that spread like wildfire, with only the loosest organization by the very weak Knights of Labor. But railroad workers who had been oppressed rose up, and it was a violent strike. It was this kind of uprising that reminds us of the Chicago and Detroit and Watts riots. It was rage against exploitation. As it rolled across the country, nowhere Was the confrontation bloodier than in Chicago, where at the so-called Battle of the Viaduct, dozens of workers and many police were injured, dozens of workers killed. Yet in St. Louis, black workers and white workers united, created an organized strike committee modeled on the Paris Commune, took control of the city, conducted a peaceful strike, the very first general strike in American history. The consequences, of course, in the aftermath was that the federal government and the states all wanted to suppress any future outbreak of the same kind. The federal government built Sheridan Road, the very first modern road north of Chicago to Fort Sheridan, a cavalry post on Lake Michigan, so that the cavalry could arrive in Chicago in short order to suppress any uprising. And around the country, every city was supplied with an armory, including Woodstock, a small city. And those armories were built for the express purpose of keeping arms readily available in the center of cities for the suppression of strikes. And that Sheridan Road would be used again, as we will see, and those armories would be used again. And the victims would, as always, be the working class. A few short years later, in 1886, the predecessor of the American Federation of Labor and the remnants of the Knights of Labor declared an 8-hour day nationwide strike on May 1st. In Chicago, it was more organized and strong than anywhere in the country. And in Chicago, there was already a massive wave of strikes, including a giant strike at the McCormick Reaper Works. After a very successful May Day strike, which included 10,000 people parading down Michigan Avenue, the next day, May 2nd, police opened fire on strikers outside of the McCormick Reaper Works, killing several. On May 4th, workers organized a protest at the Haymarket. It was, as has been mentioned, a largely peaceful protest, but there was a great deal of anger. During that protest, the police, against the explicit orders of the mayor of Chicago, began a rear attack on the crowd, as it was getting ready to disperse, by the way. Someone threw a bomb, no one knows who. In the ensuing melee, several police were killed, most of them killed by wildfire from their own revolvers. In the aftermath, Chicago labor leaders, most of them German and most of them anarchists, which was the leading form of radicalism of the time, were placed on trial. 4 of them were hung, including Albert Parsons, from whom we're going to hear a little bit later. 2 years later, Samuel Gompers, of all people, of the AFL, in an international meeting in Paris, proposed that May 1st become an International Labor Day to honor the martyrs of Chicago. And so it was. And so, although we celebrate May Day today, every other country in the world virtually celebrates Labor Day on May 1st in honor of the martyrs of Chicago. In 1894, Eugene B. Debs and his American Railway Union came to the defense of the workers of Pullman, Illinois. who had suffered wage cuts and then summarily being fired when they protested. That strike was actually a boycott of Pullman cars, which the Pullman company and the railroads conspired to spread by attaching Pullman railway cars to mail trains, knowing that that would stop the mails. Grover Cleveland, a Democratic president but a very conservative man, called against the pleas of Governor Otgell, called the army to crush the strike. And the cavalry rode down from Fort Sheridan just as designed, and with sabers drawn, did crush the strike. Eugene V. Debs and his entire executive board were tried for conspiracy and were eventually held in Woodstock jail because the authorities were afraid that if they were kept in Chicago, the workers of Chicago would storm the jails and free them. Here, while a trustee, he and his executive board learned and studied, and Eugene V. Debs became a socialist. He became more committed to industrial unionism. And when his time was up, 10,000 workers, including, to the horror of the Republican bosses of Woodstock, the workers from the many factories that had located here, carried Eugene V. Debs through this park to that railway station on their shoulders to deliver him to a train that took him to Chicago, where 100,000 people greeted him. In 1919, with the First World War just barely over, the workers at Chicago's great packing houses went on strike against Armour and Swift and the other great meat packers. Another great, violent, and suppressed strike. The public had reacted in horror to The Jungle by Upton Sinclair when he tried to explain the conditions under which workers toiled, but they reacted in horror only because their meat was being processed in such an ugly way. That very same year, in the summertime, 3 black boys drifted to the wrong side of a beach on the south side onto an unmarked division point and set off 3 days of deadly rioting, the Chicago race riots of 1919. But don't think that is the race riots that you think were blacks' riot. This was a riot by white people against black people in which they were hunted down, shot, killed, and burned. In that same year, a obscure young bureaucrat for an even more obscure agency of the Justice Department, then known as the Bureau of Investigation, named J. Edgar Hoover, organized raids across the country known as the Palmer Raids, which arrested immigrants for deportation who were considered too radical, and also raided the halls and offices of the Socialist Party that Eugene V. Debs had founded, and of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, which Eugene V. Debs had founded. And in Chicago, 101 members of the IWW, almost the entire leadership, were put on trial and sentenced to years in prison for simply possessing a union card that the government did not like. And that same year, Eugene V. Debs was sentenced to prison. A long prison stretch in the federal prison in Atlanta for simply giving a speech that criticized the American participation in World War I. Then we have the Great Depression, which began with great unemployment, and the widow of Albert Parsons, one of the Haymarket martyrs, Lucy Parsons, a black, mulatto, and Hispanic woman, led tens of thousands of the unemployed on a march in Chicago that scared the hell out of the city. Through the entire decade of the 30s, there was turmoil, ending, if not ending, but climaxing on Memorial Day, 1939, when Chicago police attacked a large crowd of strikers in the Little Steel Strike who were walking across an open meadow to the Bethlehem and Republic Steel plants with their families and their children, and shot them in the back and bludgeoned them in what became known as the Memorial Day Massacre. This is all our heritage. And it has not been limited just to labor things. The resistance of black folks, represented to some degree by Martin Luther King's campaign for open housing, which culminated in the marches in Marquette Park, which I was privileged to have walked in. And the many protests that they had to endure were part of the same uprising of feeling. 50 years ago, this last month, at the Democratic National Convention, protesters took to the streets in opposition to the Vietnam War. And I can't believe it, but I was one of them 50 years ago, this last week. And we saw what the workers of the 19th and 20th century saw: raw police violence. The last week or so of August, there was lots of articles commemorating that event, including articles by learned men and supposed experts who proclaimed that the demonstrations had enabled the rise of the right wing that we know today. Horseshit, excuse me. I know there's a person over there that will hate me for saying that. That was a righteous protest, if sometimes silly. Today, as we stand and sit here today, we are faced by perhaps the greatest challenge of any generation yet. We are on the verge of surrendering our long fought and cherished privileges, freedoms, and positions to an oligarchy led by a madman and to open fascism. It is our responsibility to take up the traditions that all of those people who came before us laid at our feet. Black lives matter. Working class lives matter. Immigrant lives matter. Women's lives matter. Today we have two things that we must do, and we must do them both. We must take to the streets when we need to. And we've been good in McHenry County. We've surprised the heck out of this community over the last 2 years by taking to the streets repeatedly. We must be ready to lay it on the line, because things may get hairy. But we must also use this time or lose forever the opportunity to vote to protect our hard-fought gains. This year, I don't care if you do not particularly like the ideological stripe of every single person on the ticket. This is not a year to exercise your ideological purity. If you exercise your ideological purity this year, you are doing a disservice to the working class. This year, every single person here needs to vote, needs to act, and needs to project its power from the top to the bottom. And if there's someone in the middle that you don't like, hold your damn nose. I just ask you to all remember that the message is the timeless message of solidarity. Solidarity forever.
I want to thank Patrick again for speaking about the sacrifices that so many have made for all of us, for the rights that we have today, for this day, and everything, and all the other days. I'd like at this moment to reflect on those sacrifices with a moment of silence for the martyrs of Labor Day, for the martyrs of all labor movements in American history. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Are you still with us? All right. Next, I'm going to welcome up, let's give a big round of applause. We've got a Democratic candidate running in County Board, District 2. She's a pretty amazing woman. And why don't we give it up for Sue from District 2, Suzanne Ness.
Wow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming out today. I know this morning it looked a little scary, but I'm so glad that the clouds parted a little bit, gave us a little bit of a break here, and allowed us to continue on with this wonderful event. My name is Suzanne Ness. I am a first-time Democratic candidate running in District 2, which is the southeastern part of the county. Thank you. And it is a true pleasure to be speaking here today on this day that celebrates and honors the hardworking men and women of this great nation. As I thought about the day and what I wanted to say, my mind kept going back through history to the stories of our ancestors and the fight to create a better future for themselves and their families that we just heard about from Patrick a few minutes ago. In fact, those stories of struggle, as they stay with me, and I think about what was really on the line for people, I don't know that any of us can ever really imagine what that's like, and I certainly don't ever want to go to a time when that might be true again, which is one of the reasons why so many of us have stepped up to run. And it's also a poignant time for me because we are the first generation who may not actually be able to provide a better life for our children. Wage disparities at an all-time high, and with our current federal administration, that's only likely to continue, even with minimum wages rising in certain places. My thoughts on history also reminded me of how we tend to recall and remember significant moments and the names of the architects of great structures and movements. For example, the great pharaohs and kings of Egypt, we remember their names, not the names of the millions of workers and slaves who built the pyramids. We can remember and recall the great names of kings and conquerors, not the workers and soldiers who built their fortresses and fought their battles. We remember great corporations and names of businessmen, not the millions of employees who worked in less than ideal working conditions or suffered significant health issues as a result of the work they did. We also show this in the wages that we pay people. Sports figures earn millions of dollars, And just in the last 2 weeks, the Economic Institute policy came out with a statistic showing that CEO bonuses and compensations are up 300% from the average worker. And workers' wages have remained stagnant despite the tax stimulus that the Republicans are so happy to boast about. I don't know about you, but trickle down has always sounded pretty meager to me. It's kind of like throwing scraps to the dogs. Meanwhile, one of our fastest growing demographics here in the United States is people over the age of 65. And the industry of home health care and nursing home workers is woefully understaffed and underpaid. And this is only one small example of the kinds of issues we're going to face in the next 20 years. It also reflects where our priorities are as a nation under our current leadership. History is full of stories that show us that when imbalances tip enough, something happens to change the course of that direction. In America, employees unionized to create more ability to bargain for better wages, working conditions, and benefits. The federal government supported a number of these initiatives with laws designed to uphold workers' rights, not because government's against business, but because government represents the common good. It represents everyone, not just those with money or interests who have the most to gain from less oversight and regulation. In fact, most of us, if not all of us here, are beneficiaries of such large government initiatives like the GI Bill, which allowed millions of people formerly left out of formal education to obtain degrees and gain employment that created the middle class, and initiatives like the Fair Housing Act that opened up housing for so many more people to secure safe and affordable housing for their families. In fact, I argue that if it weren't for many of these programs, most of us would still be living in slums, paying rents to a few landowners, similar to the fictitious Pottersville of the movie It's a Wonderful Life. In fact, in that movie, one of my favorite scenes is when Jimmy Stewart, aka George Bailey, is getting ready to leave on his honeymoon with a fistful of cash on the same day that the stock market crashed. He stands on the counter of the building and loans, and he implores people to only take what they need. He explains, your money isn't sitting around in a vault. It's built in the walls of your neighbor's home so they could have a safe home for their families. It's in your communities and your neighbors' lives so that they could create a better life for themselves and their families. So while some of the people in that scene took their full amounts, many only took what they needed, and thus they rode out the panic and terror of the moment. By only taking what they needed, they held out together to get through that difficult time. I believe that most of us feel the same way. We can successfully apply these principles to other areas today, like affordable health care for all, and a reasonable living wage that lets everyone work and provide for their families with dignity and respect. It is unconscionable that in our nation, people work full-time at one or two jobs and they're not able to pay even their most basic needs. I'm not okay with that. So we need to help everyone rise up and enjoy part of that prosperity. I see a sign out there, $15 minimum wage is a living wage for all. Yes. Even before the government created such large-scale initiatives, unions formed to allow workers more dignity and quality of life by creating communities for their workers. My own family benefited from unions. My grandfather was a postal worker, and my grandmother was able to receive his benefits long after he passed because she worked during a time when women didn't have their own accounts. They couldn't apply for a credit card even. So without that ability to have those benefits, she would not have been able to retire and live the way she lived. Of course, she's still alive, 95, so she's going strong. Another one of my uncles was hurt and unable to work, and the union made sure his family had enough food and essentials to cover their most basic needs. This should be the norm, though today you will hear more stories of how that is not the case. In fact, I sent a message to one of my brother-in-laws who works for a trucker union, and I asked him, Ray, what's your biggest benefit of being a part of the union? What do you get? So I couldn't possibly say it as well as him. He said, safety is one of the biggest benefits. being able to speak up to the company without fear of repercussion, to be able to provide a fair wage and health and welfare for our families, and to be able to retire with dignity. I was really touched by that. The attack on the middle class has been going on for some time. I've traveled throughout the United States in the work that I do, and I've seen firsthand the demise of whole communities, and for people who've been pushed to the edges that they thought they'd never have to go to. In fact, oh, wrong page, hold on. I remember one day driving home from Kansas City after my flight had been canceled due to weather. As I was driving, I stopped at a truck stop in western Missouri, which felt like it was in the middle of nowhere. There was a Wendy's in this truck stop, and a young man who looked a little bit worse for the wear was standing in front of me asking for a job application. I remembered thinking to myself, how much might this job pay? And what would it be like to live in a place where a truck stop Wendy's was considered a decent job option? That was in 2014, 5 years after the Great Recession. So many people have not recovered despite the economic turnaround that has greatly improved the wealth of many and left many more so far behind. And it's not just out there where that happens, for it's right here in our own communities as well. Since I started my campaign, I've knocked on hundreds of doors. And what I've learned so much, I've learned a ton. I've also discovered that so many in our own community have not recovered. I've seen it in the multi-generational households living under one roof. I've met grandparents caring for their grandchildren because their adult children can't afford those basic needs. I've met people who are disabled and unable to work, some injured on the very jobs that they then lost. Older people homebound in wheelchairs who can't get to the grocery store. People running GoFundMe accounts to pay for their medical needs. And the silent decay of a roof left on a little too long, of weeds allowed to flourish, of fences in need of repair, of screens with holes, or worse, the forms stuck on the door with foreclosure warnings and other violations that for that family only add to the humiliation in the list of debts owed. All of these outer signs all indicate to a sign of an inner battle that's being lost, of a sense of hopelessness and despair and not knowing how to get out of circumstances that are not necessarily their own fault, but just happened on top of more and on top of more. And so I ask you, who speaks for them? Who's willing to speak for them? Well, we must. We must all speak up. As the great 20th century labor organizer Mother Jones believed, change will only come through the mass campaign of workers as citizen activists. It's time for all of us to become those citizen activists. As a local candidate, I know we can do better. Having fresh voices at the table who represent everyone, not just the interests of business or the interests of a few, need to be represented. Not every decision should be made solely on the basis of saving money. For I've also learned by knocking on all those doors that not everybody in McHenry County feels like their taxes are too high. People have told me and shared with me they like their communities. They believe in supporting their local schools, their parks, and the social service agencies that help support their neighbors. I believe we have the ability to create solutions. I believe we have the ability to create solutions that serve all of us, not just some of us. And I also believe that together we can raise each other up so that no one gets left behind. No family should ever have to bear the burden of weighing the cost of paying for their child's medical treatment at the risk of losing their home. We don't have to accept this as the norm. We can change it. Vote on November 6th and let your voice be heard. And then continue to be engaged, informed, and in action. So I invite you to enjoy this day of rest because there's a lot of work to do between now and November 6th. It'll be here before you know it. Thank you.
That's Suzanne Ness. She's running for County Board in District 2. Thank you. And one thing that she brings up that we never hear, you know, from the other side is how many families here in the county are suffering still, and how many families here are still waiting for that trickle down to come. So thank you for bringing that up, Suzanne. Thank you for speaking.
Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, we're going to have some more music now, and I want to say a special thank you to Keith Johnson and Off Square Music, who have been with us from the very beginning, 4 years ago. And these guys really are the foundation of this event, and we can't thank them enough. Steve Stukenberg back there has got a basket in his hand. You see the man there? We would encourage you all to make a little donation to them. They're a not-for-profit organization, and they're just terrific. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to sing you a little song that talks about some of the things our speakers have been talking about.
I've traveled across this country, from shore to shining shore. It's really made me wonder the things I heard and saw. I saw the weary farmer out in sod and loam. I heard the auction hammer come knocking down his home. But the banks are made of marble, with a guard at every door, and the vaults are stuffed with silver that the farmer sweated for. I've seen the weary miner scrubbing coal dust from his back. I heard his children crying, got no coal to heat this shack. But the banks are made of marble, with a guard at every door, and the vaults are stuffed with silver that the miner sweated for. I've seen my brothers working across this mighty land. I prayed we'd get together and together make our stand. Then we might own those banks of marble, with a guard at every door, and we could share those vaults of silver that we sweated for. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker here is Brian Dupres. Brian is a retired letter carrier and the financial secretary-treasurer of the Northeastern Illinois Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. Let's have a round of applause and a big thank you to Brian.
Thank you very much. Whenever I have more than a couple of minutes to speak, I like to have one informational piece. So I'm going to start with some information about Social Security and make sure that you know that it ran a $44 billion surplus in 2017. and a $35 billion surplus in 2016. It ended 2017 with over a $3 trillion reserve balance, sometimes called the trust funds, that's been building since the mid-1980s. Now we are entering a period for the first time in 36 years when we will be drawing down on the reserves, which is why they were created. And adjustments will be needed to continue paying 100% of more or current benefits after 2034 or 5. But when anyone talks of Social Security going bankrupt, please know you are being manipulated, if not being set up for outright deception. What does labor want? We want more schoolhouses and less jails, more books and computers and less arsenals, more learning and less vice, more leisure and less greed, more justice and less revenge. In fact, more of the opportunities to cultivate our better natures. Samuel Gompers said that 125 years ago. And it is as true today as it was then. I did add the part about the computers. When Voltaire said, "It is up to us to cultivate our garden," he was referring to educating our young and ourselves as we move through the ages and stages of life. The history of the middle class in America is the history of labor in America. Look at the benefits derived from organized labor. The 8-hour workday, affordable health care, a retirement, the weekend, the end of child labor, a safer workplace, and a safer and cleaner environment. The creation of a middle class, and a society where you could work to live and not live to work. Have you ever thought of what you would do if you lived before these benefits were won? Would you follow Samuel Gompers? Would you be heroic and go to the Haymarket Square? Would you make the kind of sacrifices required for the greater good? You don't have to dream of days gone by. You can make a difference today, this week, this month, by supporting those who support the values of organized labor. Where do you find those values outside of organized labor? Well, you can find those values, and you heard some today, in many candidates that are running for public office, as well as many organizations that are supporting those candidates. If you want affordable health care, access for everyone, if you want to change America, if you want to change our society, we have to work for that change. As Gandhi said, you have to be the change you want to see. So kudos to Steve Stukenberg, Mark Gately, and Kristina Zahorik for assisting and enabling us to have a conversation with our fellow citizens, to talk about the importance of electing the right people to public office, who will always put people's well-being first, who believe in the dignity of work, and are willing to dignify that work and worker with livable wages. When the bottom wage moves up and affordable health care is provided, it creates increased demand for goods and services. And we all do better. Yes, it is true. We all do better when we all do better. Thank you very much.
All right. Don't get nervous about the rain. We have a plan, but none of us are meteorologists either. So next we have Michael Williamson. He was raised here in McHenry County. He has been a high school English, political science, and debate teacher for 18 years. He currently serves as Lead 300 President, which is the teacher local of over 1,500 members that serves School District 300. He also serves as a member of the Executive Committee on the Board of Directors of Illinois Education Association. So please welcome Michael Williamson.
Thank you. Okay, so audience, you out there? Yeah! Let me hear you. Yeah! All right, so like a previous speaker, instead of a hearing problem, I have a seeing problem. So I can't see your smiles and I can't see your fists up, which means I gotta hear your voices up. Are you with me? Yeah! Excellent. I'm gonna ask you to give me a call back in a little while. I'm gonna say we are all stronger when we are, and I need you to yell back, united. You wanna practice? Yeah. We are all stronger when we are united. Excellent, it'll come back. So, one of the exceptionally powerful things about being an educator is that the people for whom I work are also the people with whom I work, my students. That's who I work for, and that's who I work with. And it's a constant struggle. That's what education is. Okay, not because, and some of these things are true. Well, all these things are true. I made myself sound like a liar, sorry. That was funny. That's better. Okay, so all of these things are true. Students come to us with more difficulties than we've ever seen before. They come to us with adverse childhood experiences that will affect their health when they grow older and now, not just the regular. They come to us in places where they're not yet able to learn. But all that aside, every student is struggling because that's what learning is. And the job of an educator is to take on that struggle with his or her students.
Struggle.
Okay? As far as I'm concerned, it's what I was made for. It's what we were made for. So, it's a constant struggle. And as Jim May put it earlier, it's also a constant struggle to find a way to fully fund public education, from preschool to the end of higher ed. Why? Because that's how we take on that struggle. So now let me share something, an insight from a 5-year-old. You ever spend time with a 5-year-old? They are full of insights. So I'm in a kindergarten class, I'm doing a day-long visit with an exceptional teacher, and the teacher asks all of us, can you get up and find a rectangle? Put your hand on a rectangle somewhere in the room. And I'm wandering around looking for a rectangle, and a 5-year-old looks at me and says, what is your problem? Said, I can't find a rectangle. You know, it's that backwards teacher thing you do where you pretend you can't do something so the child will teach you. And the child looks at me and goes, that poster's a rectangle. That ruler on the wall is a rectangle. Those tiles are a rectangle. Put your hand on one of them. And I guess I wasn't fast enough. So I start walking towards the ruler and the child says, you know what? The bathroom door is a rectangle. Well, when the light's off. When the light's on, it's not a rectangle because you can see inside. And I thought, well, what does that really mean? But when you think about it, that's a pretty powerful insight from a student, okay? That when you recognize a thing only as its outline, only as its shape, it's a thing that can be discounted. You don't see its complexities. Okay? So here's an outline of something I think we need to think about. Those arranged against labor are also those arranged against public education. Those lines intersect. Why? Because anti-labor is also pro-corporate education, pro-corporate funding education. And what is that? Because in the anti-labor movement, we tend to be looking at the benefits of the stockholders. And when we look at corporate education, we are looking at the benefits of the stockholders, not the students for whom I work, with whom I work. And that's what's important about that intersection, and that is an outline of the difficulties we're seeing right now with our current Illinois governor, whose greatest claim to fame may be that he sent up a Supreme Court case to try to destroy labor in public unions. Well, I gotta be honest, all Bruce Rauner did by doing that was screw my teeth back in, because I'd love to settle this with a good dust up, and that's what we're gonna do. So let me come back around here to how heavy that was and give you another story from a 6-year-old this time. 6-year-olds have even more insight than 5-year-olds. I'm watching a 6-year-old draw and talk to the teacher. And the teacher says to the 6-year-old, "What are you drawing?" And he says, "Mutant space spiders on top of buildings." She says, "Well, what do they do?" And he says, "They come down here to fight people." And she looks at him and says, "Like who, Spider-Man?" And the child turns real slowly and gives her this look like, "What's your problem?" And he says, "Miss, Spider-Man isn't real." Well, okay, but mutant space. Well, anyway, she did what a teacher does, and she said, "Okay, who are they fighting?" And the child thinks about it for a second and says, "The government, my teacher, my dad." There's a staggering insight. Our heroes are not people with special powers out there in the world. They're regular people. They're our teachers, they're our fathers, they're our colleagues who will join the armed services, okay? And this is the insight of this child. And these kids know these things. And I'm just gonna go back to what Alice Walker would say and say, we are the ones for whom we've been waiting. I'm gonna go back to what NEA Vice President Becky Pringle would say and say, we have been called to leadership at this time and in this place. I'm going to go to what Kathy Griffin, IEA president, would say and say, we are all stronger when we are united. Okay? And here's another outline for you briefly. I read in a blog post yesterday that very soon Los Angeles will have a Barack Obama Boulevard. Hell yeah. Let's hear that. Yeah. And that boulevard is going to intersect with Martin Luther King Boulevard. Yeah. And that blog poster suggests that when we think about this, what this means is that here we have the intersection of hope and dreams. And so quickly, before you get drenched, let me just say this. I was in a general strike in South Africa, and it was hope. I was in a strike here in District 300, and that hope turned into the dream of getting our voices heard. Okay? We are bringing this forward, we are bringing labor forward, and let me tell you this, my working conditions are the children's learning conditions, are all of our living conditions. Hope and dreams come together in labor. Help me move that forward, citizen activists.
Woo! Guys, thank you. We're going to go to the poorhouse. If you're still into it, there's candidates left here, and there's speakers here if you want to speak to them. So if you want to run down to the poorhouse, it's here on Main. Thank you all for coming.
Miserable. He waited for 2.5 years to pass a budget. His constitutional responsibility, and yet he didn't get it done. He waited and waited and waited. We were on the brink, right, of doom and disaster. And then he goes around to other states and tells how bad Illinois is. So, well, of course, how are you going to have business come and invest? How are we going to be able to build up and fix? And I also want to point out that we were on the right path of paying down our bills until Rauner. We weren't there yet, but we were on the right path, meeting our obligations. And now, holy shit, right? And we all feel that we're going to be responsible for that nut, right? And change has to come, and for me, frankly, can't come soon enough. And the second part of that is, of course, with Trump. And I'm sure all of you, like me, find it really difficult to explain to your children about how it is that someone in leadership can lie. Someone in leadership can only care about themselves and or people that are exactly like them. And even then, I'm not so sure, right? And we have an opportunity in this county to actually make a miracle happen. And I'm going to say a miracle because the 14th Congressional District, as many of you know, and have heard me speak, was carved out, not for us. And then you look at the numbers, I think it's 1 in 3, your chances of winning. Woo! Right? This is our chance to actually make a change and to hold Trump accountable.
Yeah.
And again, we cannot do it unless everyone in this room, and everyone you know, and everyone you think you know, and even those folks in the street that you don't know, here's about Warren. And here's about why it's important to elect someone who actually cares about service and actually cares about the people that live in this district and isn't afraid to actually go out and meet people and hear their stories and understands that it's not just about her, it's about us. Right? So there's a lot to do. We only have, I don't know, someone's going to tell me 60 some odd days left? 54? 54? 64. 64 days left. Right? So every day I challenge you to tell yourself to make a little note. Right? Make a little chart. Give yourself a little gold star. Every single time you do something to help a candidate. Because all these policies that help labor, that help the middle class, that help us, that give us a brighter future, only happen when policy happens, right? And policy only happens when we get people elected, and that includes up and down the ticket, right? So thank you for staying. We meet, the Democratic Party of McHenry County meets every third Wednesday over at the college. And we also have a lot of district chairs now that are holding meetings closer to your home. So for example, we have Kathryn Potter over in District 1, right? We have Carlos, you can hear from, he's in District 5, which is here. I saw John Levi over in District 2. He may not be here. Who's back there? Mary Mahaney's candidate. Missy Funk in District 4. And we have, I see Mary Mahaney's, we can give her a shout out. Mary Mahaney's in the back of the room. Right there. That's another thing too, is that, I'm reminded from our candidates that the other side of the aisle, right, what's their tactic against us? They really only have one, right, besides telling things that aren't true. The attacks that are coming are going to say things like, tax and spend Democrats and Mike Madigan, right? Those are those are really the only two things that they have, because they can't talk about any policy. They can't talk about any achievement that they've done, right? In fact, Mary Mahaney is running for a seat that someone just stepped down from. I don't want to say her name. And of course, it's the Republicans. It's their game plan, right? So they shuffle amongst each other, right? So they retire from office and then they slip in the next person without the voters actually having a say, so that person can run as an incumbent.
And they win the seat and don't actually complete the term.
That's right.
It's a good thing he won.
Right. So it's and I think that one of the things that are going to come out, you're going to hear more and more attacks. And as a Democrat, as a rational person, I ask you to not spread the lies. Don't do the other side's work. They can do it on their own. We can speak to positive we can speak to all the great things that we care about and will do as Democrats, right? And you know, they're just. I'm starting to see some of them come out. I mean, I've seen some of them against Lauren. I said, I gotta laugh at them. Or some of them against some of our other candidates. Where I think I saw one. It's Trisha Zuber, who's running, who's slated. You know, there's 2 chairs, and all they can do is have a picture of Trisha and a picture of the speaker. You know, oh, my selected candidate, my hand-picked candidate. That's a bunch of bullshit. I'll tell you, she was slated. She was handpicked by me, right? And my fellow state senate committeewomen who were over in Lake County because we met her. She was upset about all the issues about guns and went to a non-command action. In fact, she went down to speak to her legislator and was dismissed. No one's surprised by that, right? Right? So, and that's what got her to run. And we see more and more of our candidates stepping up because of that, right? People like you. So, again, please make a plan, not only to vote, but make a plan in these next few days to help Democratic candidates who believe in the things that you believe in win. And I'll see you November 7th. Come over.
Piggyback a little bit on what Kristina said, there is municipal elections coming up in January 2019. Run for your school boards, run for your library boards, run for your park district boards. These are the races that we can win and that we can keep the Tea Party out of. They want to destroy our schools and our libraries.
You may have seen it in the news, but the Tea Party is specifically targeting library boards this time around. So the petitioning period starts 2 days ago, probably. So get to start working on your petitions. Anyway,
please reach out to Kristina or me or somebody over at the Democratic Party in McHenry County or somebody over at McHenry County Progressives. They will help you figure out what you have to do. But if we don't run, they are going to run the craziest person that they can find. And that person usually wins because they run unopposed. So please step up, be inspired. There's a lot of inspiring people here, and everybody here is counting on us. All of us. See? Yeah. So we're going to keep with the same schedule. Do you want to introduce our next speaker?
Our next speaker is from an organization that has been in the newspapers quite a bit recently, in the news a lot. They are shrinking the political landscape. I'd like to introduce Aaron Goldberg from the McHenry Lake County chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America.
So, when Eugene Debs was released from prison in 1895, he was a socialist. He spent his time in prison reading Karl Marx's Das Kapital, and he realized something, that it wasn't enough to get a living wage. It wasn't enough to get a living wage from George Pullman. It wasn't enough for the Vanderbilt family to provide health care to their employees, for the Rockefellers to offer paid sick and family leave, for Carnegie and DuPont to ensure safer working conditions. Debs realized that as soon as concessions were given to the people, those same capitalists they were fighting against would start to claw them back day one. He also realized one more thing, that this struggle didn't end at the U.S. border, that the oligarchy, the chemical barons, and the banking cartel had their sights set elsewhere. And in response to that, Debs helped found the Industrial Workers of the World, an international socialist movement. And so I'd like to quote possibly the most influential man in United States history. He was a two-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, the most decorated Marine in the history of the United States, and the man who saved America from the first fascist coup, General Smedley Butler. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico and especially Tampico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1902. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents, end quote. In 1918, Debs would be jailed again. This time he was charged with sedition for encouraging young men to resist the draft for World War I. With Smedley Butler being the commander of all U.S. forces on the European continent at the time, the 2 men would make for strange ideological bedfellows, arriving at the same conclusions under completely independent circumstances. That repeatedly our government has been used as a tool to repress workers, not just here in America, but all around the world. Through the capitalist class's network of shills and lobbying firms, they have always exerted complete dominance over U.S. foreign and domestic policy. And there must be a radical redistribution of power from the capitalist class to the people to deal with this. So let's take stock of where we are today. We're a decade and a half into 2 wars, started by the grandson of a fascist, who not only tried to overthrow the U.S. government in 1933, but was also the financial architect of the Third Reich. His partner in crime, of course, was a shill from the oligarchy, namely Halliburton.
Wow.
To follow up that performance, a prominent billionaire found another shill for the banking cartel to prop up. One who would go so far as to allow him to handpick his entire cabinet. A cabinet that would decide how many billions of dollars the bankers who selected them would be handed for free. If that weren't bad enough, he went on to start 6 more wars, spiraling the country further into the debt slavery his predecessor had ingeniously got us into. And all the while, the modern chemical barons and the Koch brothers, the mercantile cartel with Bezos and the Walton family, along with their media conglomerates, financial backers and Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, and the rest of Wall Street, would ensure the systematic destruction of the social democracy that was built in America after the Great Depression. Debs was as right today as he was in 1895. There's no capitulation from the capitalist class that can fix the destructive system we live in, which of course is why Debs left the Democratic Party and formed a number of socialist organizations, including IWW, but also the Socialist Party of America, for whom he would make 4 of his 5 presidential runs with. The socialists he had met in prison had convinced him the only way out of the capitalist system, the only way to fix systemic inequalities in our country and on our planet, is to make a hard break with capitalism, and through a mass movement, radically redistribute the power in our society from the elite oligarchy to the common people. Debs knew this in 1895, and as the American social democracy tried to rise in the wake of the Great Depression, only to be crushed under the force of the capitalist class and unable to still exist, he was proven correct. Right now we're facing a system of trade deals and tariffs established largely over the past 2 decades, designed to consolidate corporate power, manufactured military conflicts to keep us in debt slavery by handing entire countries to nameless, faceless corporations as client states. All the while, politicians tell us if we could just get this little bit, maybe things will be better. So I'd like to close with a passage from a letter written by another socialist, Martin Luther King Jr., while he was in prison in Birmingham, Alabama. He specifically references the struggle for civil rights in America, but I think it translates perfectly into the greater struggle for equality of all people. Quote, I'd also hope that the white moderates would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. Such an attitude stems from a tragic misconception of time, from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. More and more I feel the people of ill will have used much more effectively than have the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. And with this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively, in the knowledge that the time is always right to do right. Now is the time to make the real promise of democracy and transform our pending national eulogy into the creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity." End quote. The Lake McHenry chapter of the Democratic Socialists, we meet the first Sunday of every month at the Church of the Holy Apostle in Wakanda, right off Route 59 from 1:30 to 3:30. If anyone's interested, please stop by.
First Sunday, yep. Good job.
Nice one. All right. Just, we have to organize against this organized wealth that is attacking us. So if you're not in a union, support unions. When you hear about strikes, don't follow this narrative that, union workers are, greedy and thugs and stuff. They're not thugs. They're nurses and they're teachers and they're writers. And, so please support them because we are all in this together. And we are working against the organized wealth that is trying to destroy us. So with that being said, I'd like all of us to say thanks to the poorhouse on our way out. But our next speaker, I think we all know him. We all love him. He is...
Some people think he's Batman, but we know he's Bruce Wayne.
He's from the local AFSCME, Stewart. He's a District 5 chair of the Democratic Party of McHenry County. Here's Carlos Acosta.
Thank you. All those in the back, come on in. Come on, work your way in. We got room. Thank you for that intro, and thank you to the Progressives and the Democratic Party for hosting this event. As I said, my name is Carlos Acosta. I'm the lead steward for AFSCME Local 2833, and I am a candidate for District 5 for McHenry County. It was actually a year ago on that stage that I announced my candidacy, but I'm actually not going to talk about, surprisingly, I'm not going to talk about my campaign today. Today I wanted to talk to all my union brothers and sisters. If you're in a union, active, retired, get your hand up. 2018 has been an exciting year to be in the labor movement. From February to May, we saw 6 successful teacher strikes. West Virginia, Oklahoma, all got higher wages and benefits for their teachers and for their students. Now, of course, in June, and we'll come back to this, in June, the Supreme Court ruled against AFSCME 31 in the Janus versus AFSCME 31 court case by 5-4. We'll come back to that. But right after that in August, Missouri was one of the first states to vote against right to work. Yeah! 2 weeks ago, right here in McHenry County, the McHenry County Probation Department won their first labor contract ever. And just 4 days ago, the Rauner-appointed Labor Relations Board ruled that he had violated the law and that he must pay step wages that he had not paid for the last 2.5 years. Now, interestingly, as a steward, I talk to my coworkers, and all my coworkers are like, "Oh gosh, Carlos, we've never seen it this bad. We've been state employees for 10 years, 15 years. We've never seen it that bad." And it has been talked about. Being in the labor movement has been bad, and it's been a lot worse. I mean, the reality is that the labor movement has been a road paved with tears and pain and blood. Okay, so whenever I read that Rauner denies graduate students the right to organize, I remember all of the railroad workers that suffered during the Pullman strike. When I hear that Mark Janus is going to go speak in Elgin about the Janus case, I remember all the factory workers that were killed in the Haymarket Square. And when the Illinois Policy Institute mails flyers to my co-workers telling them how to opt out of their union, I remember the coal miners that died at the Battle of Bergen. Now, at least the IPI was smart. They did not mail me a flyer because they knew what my response would be. My response would be the same response that Lee Saunders, the president of ASME, gave at our June convention in Boston. And I want all my brothers and sisters to remember this. I will never quit my union. Come on. I will never quit my union. One more time. I will never quit my union. Now, I'm ceding my time to our next speaker because I have the privilege of introducing her. She's a nurse from Naperville. Yes. She's a former policy advisor for the Department of Health and Human Services. She is one person that actually believes in investing in our infrastructure and investing in public education. She will fight for working families to have access to affordable and quality health care. She has already been endorsed by the American Federation of Government Employees, the American Nurses Association, the Illinois AFL-CIO, and the Illinois Federation of Teachers.
On Labor Day at this celebration of our labor movement. My name is Underwood. I'm a nurse from Naperville. Spent my career working to expand health care coverage around our country. Worked to implement the Affordable Care Act at the federal level and also in the Obama administration where I worked in public health emergencies and disasters. I returned home after serving in the administration because I knew I couldn't help the Trump team take away health care coverage from the American people. That's not why I became a nurse or did any of this work, and so I came home to work in the Medicaid space when I found myself at Randy Hultgren's one and only public event of 2017. And it was that moderated question and answer session hosted by our local chapter of the League of Women Voters, and that night he made a promise. He said he was only going to support a version of Obamacare repeal that let people with pre-existing conditions keep their health care coverage, and that kind of promise was important to me. Because as a nurse, I've taken care of people who rely on it in order to afford their medications and procedures, especially when they have a chronic illness. And then in working to implement the Affordable Care Act, I read the law and I know that it works and we can fix what doesn't work. We don't have to throw the whole thing away. And like so many Americans, I have a pre-existing condition myself. It's a heart condition and it's well controlled, but it's one of these diagnoses where I wouldn't be able to get coverage under the repeal scenarios. So when Randy Hultgren made that promise, I believed him because it was personal. And then what did he do? He went and voted for the American Health Care Act, the version of repeal that did the opposite, made it cost prohibitive for people like me to be able to get coverage. And I was really upset because I believe that representatives should be transparent and honest about their votes. They should be accessible to the community and ultimately know that they are accountable to us, the voters, and he didn't seem to recognize that. So I decided, you know what, it's on, I'm running. And I launched Randy Holgren directly, and I think we scared him out of hiding. After 16 months, he went on this tour. It was almost like an apology tour by the end, right? We showed him, and he heard from us how damaging his votes have been, how unpopular his votes have been, and how he's not going to have a job much longer. And so I want to thank all of you for showing up and for engaging and listening and providing that feedback back. It's so important. But listen, we have 64 days. 64 days to do the work every single day. And the work that we're doing is having an impact. I'm here to tell you, the race is close, guys. Yeah. It is so close. We are just about there. And so the work that you do over these next 64 days are critical. So the time for slacking is over. The time for waiting for others to show up and someone, your friend, to come and pull you along to knock the doors, nope, we can't wait anymore. We have to be the ringleader. I know it's Labor Day. And I'm so grateful to be supported by so many of our local unions, so many of our union households, and I want to work together. I'm so excited about the potential to have impact on behalf of working families and families all across Northern Illinois. But listen, we know what the other side wants to do. Just this week, before we started this glorious weekend, what did the president do? Came out, I know, it's so bad, came out and was talking about cutting the pay for federal employees. It is unacceptable. Here in the 14th district, we have so many federal employees, hard-working folks, just like all of us in this room, who, for no fault of their own, decided they wanted to help our country and work on behalf of the American people. And for some reason, that work has been dismissed. To this president, it's like it's almost irrelevant. And they can't even see a simple cost of living adjustment. It's ridiculous and unacceptable, and we cannot stand by and tolerate it. And we know what their agenda says. Their agenda says, cut, 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 cut. Let's dismantle every single union. Let's make it harder for workers to collectively bargain. Let's take away every single worker's right, and let's just privatize our way to the future. We can't stand for that. And so this election, think about it like your health care is on the ballot, like your job is on the ballot, like your union's on the ballot. And make sure that we vote with that sense of urgency.
Amen.
Okay? I'm a millennial. I'm 31 years old. So many of my fellow millennials are looking at an outlook that says, well, geez, home ownership seems like a stretch. And saving for retirement it seems like a luxury, right? And we know that these kinds of critical middle-class benefits are things that our unions fought for and have protected for American workers over a generation ago. And we have a whole generation, my peer group, that is struggling with these things right now. So when folks say, oh, what does it matter? Right? Why does the union matter? I'm like, are you kidding me? Of course it matters. And so I want to stand here with you today and say that I don't take this day for granted. I am so grateful for the work that all of you have done and continue to do. I want to have your back in Washington. I know that we can win. I want to win McHenry County. I know that we can, not just for me, but for all of our candidates here, because we have some great candidates on the ballot here in McHenry County, and we could do some awesome things together. And so thank you for all that you're doing. Thanks for continuing to show up for me and for all of us. We're going to win. 64 days. Let's go.
14?
Can't wait for trying.
We got two more speakers.
Two more speakers, but it is very, very important that we have integrity and secure elections that we trust, and that is what the county clerk does. I don't know if everybody does. They handle ours will be handling our most important documents. Well, you know, we're having a consolidation, so
And such important documents like your registration to vote.
your different certificates, your deeds, you know, that stuff. But most importantly, it's elections, okay, you guys? Georgi, he's the Democratic candidate. He's running for county clerk. He is here. He's going to protect us from the meddling. He's the Marine. He's going to stop it. He's going to fight it. But let's listen to him. Again, it's really important. We can have great candidates like Lauren Underwood. We can have great candidates like Carlos. But if we are not allowed to vote because we have to show an ID, because we were purged from the voter rolls, because we were turned away.
Because polling places were consolidated and now the lines go even longer than they were before.
Right. Vote from home. We could always vote from home. That's true.
But that's why this race is so important, because this race is the race that will determine how every other race will go. I mean, this race, upon this race hinges the ability to vote for all other races, and that's why it's so important. So let's bring him up here. Georgi.
I'm going to keep this real short. First, I want to thank everybody for coming out in this weather to start with, and then moving over to here. I want to thank all the different groups, the Democratic Party, the Progressive, for sponsoring us. Now, I kept it very short, one page, okay? I'm Georgi. I'm a union brat.
Yeah.
My father was a general contractor with 200 carpenters and laborers on the payroll. I was raised with 200 non-related uncles. That pushed me to be the best I could be. It was do the right thing or don't do it at all. They were all from all countries and all races. We didn't care where they were from. All we cared was how well they did their jobs. It was a time we were going to the move, and everyone believed that if they worked hard, you could go anywhere in life. We spent the weekends at summer homes in Lake and McHenry counties. We had our mom's home when we got home from school. They worked for our father's companies or part-time just to do something while us kids were in school. We had holiday trips, all because our fathers were making union wages, a living wage we could raise a family on. It meant something to be part of a union. It meant something to have a union worker do work for you. It was a symbol of good workmanship. It meant workers were being treated fairly and your well-being was being looked after. Today they are attacking the unions, saying the unions are why this country is where it is at today. Trying to make the workers out to be substandard or overpriced. That they need to be paid less to bring this country back. Trying to pass right-to-work laws and kill prevailing wage requirements. Next to my Marine Corps training, my union training was just as tough, if not more so. We need to fight this. We need to vote people into office that will fight against right to work and for prevailing wage every year at all levels. We need people to help get candidates elected by doing more than just voting. We need people to donate and volunteer for their favorite candidates. We need to pay more attention to what our local officials are voting on every month. We need people to become watch boxes with the McHenry County progressives and be our eyes and ears. Talk to this one.
I love it.
We have over 200 offices open next year that many will not be contested or even have anyone running for. Most of these offices meet only once or twice a month and won't take up too much of your time. But you can help make the changes we need to make this a better place to live. Right now you can sign up for Vote by Mail. Next month early voting starts. We must make sure we get everyone out to vote this election. We can start turning this country blue with this election. You can help by signing up for Get Out to Vote events and helping your favorite candidates. With your help, I look forward to being your next county clerk and keep fighting to protect everyone's rights and safeguard your personal information like I did for over 1,500 Marine Corps reservists. Woo!
All right, guys. Vote Drew Georgi. Is coming from far the west side of this.
District 6 is what she's trying to say.
Out west. Is this west? Okay, so District 6, Democratic County Board candidate Larry Spaeth.
Hey, my cheerleading groupie here. My name's Larry Spaeth, and I am a candidate for County Board from District 6. And I've started my last two speeches saying I am the third son of a union carpenter. I'm a retired of the letter carrier union NALC Branch 825. For life of me, I don't know why it passed over my head. My mother was also a union worker. She worked for the communications workers for AT&T back when it was Mondell. So it's a lot. While working, I represented the workers there as a shop steward. I value standing up and speaking for the people that need someone to speak for them. That's been my whole life. I've served community groups, the Lions especially, working in the community, helping the community do better, finding out what the needs are and helping people that need help. That's what I do. I'm here, if it is not clear, as a proud union member. We're here today in celebration of all the benefits that the labor movement has been instrumental in gaining for the benefit of all American workers. As you notice, I'm not a polished speaker because I have to read some of this stuff. I don't have it memorized yet. But unions have fought to give us the weekend. People don't understand that. Unions fought to give us fair and living wages, because not only did the union workers get those wages when they get a contract, the non-union workers in those same companies that weren't unionized were brought up to the same level. When you are a union member, you're bringing all the boats and they all float to the same level. So if you're earning a living wage as a union member, your neighbor is getting a union wage, even if they're not union, because they have to compete against the union workers. That's a fact of life. Unions fought to end child labor. Unions fought to provide the Family and Medical Leave Acts. Unions fought for employer-based health care coverage. It's amazing. Here in America, we must continue to fight for basic human rights. Here in America, the wealthiest nation on the planet, the corporations think they and only they have the rights. That here in America, only corporations have the right to determine what to share with their employees. The American workers who have actually earned the profits that the corporations determine what you share. After retiring in December of 16, my wife and I had several medical issues, any one of which would have bankrupted us. it had not been for the union medical benefits that supplement Medicare. I can't tell you the assurance that gives you when you have to go into the hospital and you know your expenses are being covered. And there are a lot of people that need that here in McHenry County, here in the state of Illinois, and across the country. Healthcare is a right, it is not a privilege. We must face the challenge before us and fight together for the ultimate goal of universal health care. Each of us, that deserves applause. Everybody should have it. Each of us has been given the gift of life, and that gift came not only from God, but from our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and the ancestors before them, of ours who made choices and struggled through their lives to better provide a life for us here today. Yes, we make our own choices. We have struggled through our own lives to get us to this point. But it is now up to us to face the challenges placed before us today. We stand on our ancestors' shoulders. For our brothers and sisters in the labor movement, to honor all those who came before us, we must stand tall and join in the struggle. Join the labor movement. Stand up and advance the cause of universal health care. Stand up and advance the cause of a living wage. Stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. Struggle, a nice clean word, sanitized really. Struggle is not sufficient to describe what's happened historically in the labor movement. Those in the labor movement have been attacked, intimidated, named, humiliated. When we say struggle, it is a very intense, no-holds-barred struggle for our basic rights to fair treatment and justice. Corporations are not hesitant to hire out to do their dirty work. When you see a picket line, stand up and join them for a while. Talk to them. Stop, park your car. They really would appreciate you standing with them for a few minutes at least. Okay? Honor those who have come before you. When you see injustice, stand up and fight to correct it. Honor those who have come before you. We cannot stand idly by. We are at a tipping point here in America. This struggle has never been more important. The income inequality is exponentially getting greater and is shortly to arrive at the greatest disparity in history, to exceed that of the disparity during the Great Depression. It took a fighter and a leader to face the vested interests in the banking class and corporations to lead us out of that financial disaster. It took another to lead us out of the Great Recession. They didn't want to call it depression. We must look for a leader who will stand up and fight and lead with a strong FDR-style agenda. That will help the working men and women now and into the next generation. That's also here in McHenry County and across the country. This November 6th, stand up and vote the blue wave, not only here in McHenry, but throughout the state and county and country. This November, stand up and vote blue. Thank you.
Thank you again for having us. We're about to wrap it up, and I just want to say Happy Labor Day, everybody. How are you all feeling? I share some. Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to say the thing that really sticks out is when I look at a ballot and there's only a Republican, there's no running, and I know you guys mentioned something about that, and I think that put people on the ballot. How do we do it?
Run for office.
How do you run for office?
Come to the next party meeting.
Yeah.
Talk to either of those people. Once a month.
If you're interested in running for office, so when we go to vote, it's not just a Republican there. We can put options on there that so we can vote for Democrats, so we can vote for somebody else. Please run for office. Please contact the Democratic Party of McHenry County. Please contact the McHenry County Progressives. We want to help. We are always looking for candidates. And don't think that you are not qualified to run. Please, I invite you. I am a watchfox. That's what we call ourselves. We go out to public meetings. We watch what's happening at the public meetings, and then we report back on it. When you go to these meetings, very few people go. And you get to watch who's in charge, who's running the meetings. Not all of them are qualified, okay?
It doesn't take long
It doesn't-
watching to realize you're more qualified.
Precisely, okay? And we're learning. Did everybody learn something new here today?
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, so I would like to just introduce one more time here with the closing remarks, Robert Rosenberg, the chair of the McHenry County Progressives.
So, before I say that, I want to say a big thanks to Steve Stukenberg. Steve has been with us from the beginning, the very first day one. Steve has been there, and not just for Labor Day, but for everything. He's been there from day one. He's been there from day one for the Labor Day, which is now its 4th year, I can't believe it. And for the last 2 years, and as far as I'm concerned, he's been carrying it on his back. So I want to say a big thank you to Steve because he's not here. So I want to close this afternoon with a few words. Deb tells us that ignorance alone stands in our way. That intellectual darkness is essential to industrial slavery. The conditions that we find ourselves in, the conditions that we find our nation in, is only possible because of our ignorance. Because we do not know what is rightfully ours, and we do not know our own power. But we have been deceived, and we deceive ourselves when we think that they have the right to take it all and make it their own. This is our labor, but every day it is turned over for the benefit of a wealthy few. This is our land, but every day we are treated like tenants upon it. This is our air and our water, and every day we hand it over to organized wealth to be spoiled and commodified. These are our amber waves of grain. This is our Purple Mountain Majesty. This is our nation. It is the right of the people and has the power of organized labor to make it truly great. To quote Eugene V. Debs, when we are in partnership, when we have stopped clutching each other's throats, when we have stopped enslaving each other, well, we will stand together, hands clasped, and be friends. We will be comrades. We will be brothers. And we will begin the march towards the grandest civilization the human race has ever known. Happy Labor Day. Thank you all for sticking it out. See you next year.
You're fired.